So I'm thinking I'm going to just show you a brief clip of an intergenerational situation related to community violence, just to get you all's feedback. And think about it as you, if you're looking at this clip, what do you see that you would want to address in an assessment context? We're kind of walking through, if we're starting off treatment using a strong families approach, with everything we said, trauma lens, what are some dynamics you would want to address that's both the stressors as well as the strengths here?
Imagine this, being from a family of gang members, and we are talking about your father, your uncles, your brothers, everybody part of a violent gang. That is a situation for some people in Chicago. Or George Howell, he actually sat down with a family whose gang activity has been really part of the family business now for generations.
Inside the home of this West Side Chicago family, you find a common thread, a way of life started by this father, passed on to his nephews, and now his sons.
I want to do a show of hands. I mean, how many generations have been in a gang? What was the first generation? And the second generation? And then the next? So it's just gone through the family.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I ain't proud of that, them.
Jetty Williams is a little hard to understand now since his stroke, but at one time, no voice carried more weight in Chicago's gang world. A former leader of the notorious Vice Lords gang, Williams spent most of his life awaiting trial, on probation, or in prison. He's since given up gang life.
I don't like my kids being about that, but I can't lay there and tell you, don't do this when your daddy done it. I'm not gonna be no hypocrite.
But his legacy continued.
I did robberies. You know, that was my specialty. You know, we didn't go around hurting innocent people like the kids do these days. You know, it was more about money, power, and respect, and who can get to the top of the hill first. But doing that, we still had loyalty to who started this.
Through this generation era, it bled down into them. When it got down to them, the blood was running in the streets. And they had no guidance, because a lot of us was locked up. So they had no guidance. So they just became like renegades.
And that's one of the problems plaguing Chicago's streets today.
It's just everybody out there for themselves, you know. It's just like whatever happens, just happens.
Shots fired.
Chicago police spent years cracking down on gang leaders who operated in large parts of the city, but according to the Cook County State Attorney, the gang lifestyle has become entrenched.
What we've seen now is these gangs are generational. So you have, you know, grandpa, father, son, all part of the gang. So it's just kind of been the culture that kids have been brought up into.
And Anita Alvarez says gangs have also fractured into many different factions. The result? Young rival gang members fighting each other block by block with deadly consequences. It's a problem these former gang members are trying to turn around, starting with their own family.
Now I'm out there trying to teach the young people to look at me. I'm 46. I've been to the penitentiary 10 times. But now I have got married, and I see a different way in life.
And their influence seems to be paying off.
It made me look up to them now, you know, like I'm changed. I don't need none of that old violence, none of that stuff.
Fountain's namesake says he recently dropped out of the gang.
It made me feel good.
A small sign of hope in a city struggling with a big problem, trying to make the streets safe again.
Now, I want to acknowledge before we open the floor, that was a mainstream news channel's perspective on intergenerational trauma. There's a few things that I might have done differently, but it was a nice short clip. And I'm really interested in what you all thought about that based on what we've talked about from a trauma lens, not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you, what's good about you, and think about the things that they said are on their records that we would get in our intake sheet, prison, violence, and that, and what they're doing now. There might be strengths, not just stressors. I like that we notice the connections, the love between the family members, the fact that they're still working together as a cohesive unit. And now they're putting that energy toward not only impacting folks inside their home, but in their communities, right? And they still have that history, but they've been able to make changes. So when people write folks off because they make a mistake, that we're actually losing some of our potential resources to help make changes. And so to underscore a couple very important points, we don't even have time to dig all the way into this, but there is a history of gangs in Chicago, and they didn't start to destroy their communities. They actually started to defend their communities against attacks. And if you look at, which has just been romanticized in the Judas and the Black Messiah movie, they were moving in a social political development direction because there was a structure, there was leadership, there were some pro-social elements. There's been a fracturing, right? And there's a reason for that fracturing, which is not all just the communities collapsing. There's also this thing called oppression, which has redirected or disorganized those I call them street organizations. That being said, it also talks about the complexity and the diversity of what does it mean to be a gang member, right? So I do believe in, and full disclosure, I have met and know some gang members who they literally had a code. It's like, no, we don't bother civilians. We're not going to go shooting in front of schools. We're not going to do. And you also have a few who like they have no code, and they'll shoot up a funeral. They're both gang members. Which one are you talking about? Which is the one that's coming in your office? And even at one, which will shoot up a funeral, how they get to that point? Because something has happened to get to that point. This is a whole other conversation we can. I just wanted to touch on that, and hopefully we'll keep this going in day two. But it's like, well, what happened to you? Because people don't just what has happened to the young people that they'll do that. And the only other thing I'd mention there is just keeping it real is that a lot of times we will put headlines and sensationalist slogans on reactions to life that young people are making in the world the adults created around them. And it just humanizes folks so we can actually engage with them and tap into those good parts. We're providers, we're also advocates. I found that just comes with the turf. I think when we're doing assessment, and assessment's ongoing. There's intake, but there's ongoing assessment. You're always checking in about new things which have happened. You all heard, for example, I'll use a popular example. You all heard about Quando Rondo, very famous rapper entertainment. He publicly has disavowed the Crips. He's rejected it. You got Gangster Disciples today. You got Vice Lords today. You got people today. That's a good thing. And there's also a risk that we have to do when we're doing our safety planning. What does that mean for you? I'm happy you're doing that. I'm happy. Okay, now how's that going to look like on the ground? What did your friends say about that? What did your crew say about that? Do you have their permission to leave? Or did you say, I'm doing it and you better not mess with me? See, there's a different safety planning I'll do based on those scenarios. I'm encouraging it. I'm also being practical, right? Because I wanted to be successful. Now, in that type of family, maybe because you got 3 generations of folks who may have respect not only inside the house, but in the community, they may actually be safe. And they could do that. And they actually could be models and mentors and inspirations for others. There might be some other, let me say, lower ranking or not as established folks. They try to make a move like that. Then they got to look for retaliation, right? Those are just the dynamics we would keep in mind while we're still encouraging them to make these changes. But those are different clinical scenarios when I'm doing my assessment and treatment planning that I need to be clear about. And for all of you who are not doing all this assessment treatment planning, what I'm talking about is when we get a plan. Because after we meet and we find out what's going on, we always got to, as a provider, what's my plan? And how are we going to work together to help you get where you need to go? And I have to account for that. And especially let's think about some of our families that might be in multi-generational households. So that picture of that family, they could all be under the same roof. Think about the reciprocal impacts that they could have and that you can help with. Also, I think back to what you were saying, Missy, having honest conversations. Because I made a mistake don't mean I want you to make it. right? And that's an honest conversation. And some young people like, because you made a mistake, you're still sitting here. I want to go make it too. We're gonna have some fun too. And then when I get older, I'm gonna stop too. It's like you don't always get that choice. And think about the people who aren't sitting next to us because they wanted to go have fun and now they're no longer with us. Whether they're, I call it being buried alive, incarcerated, or being buried dead in the ground. Plus, what's the ramifications for your family? You may say, I'm tough, I'm hard, I could deal with this. But that don't protect your sister, your brother, your grandmother, your grandfather, your cousin. Yeah. And people, I don't want to bring up too many things because we're almost out of time. But something I have had to explicitly talk about that I know you all know occurs when you got these cycles of violence. I've had to address specifically kidnapping. Now there's trafficking. What happens after you get kidnapped? You formally are put into labor. There's agricultural trafficking as well as sexual trafficking. But there's also retaliatory kidnapping because you hurt one of mine. Now I'm gonna go grab your, you know, cousin or your mother up off the block, and you better show up at this place. And none of this gets reported. Like it's funny when I see statistics about kidnapping. I'm like, you're not talking about kidnapping within all communities, and not all those stats are reflected because the people who sometimes are impacted, they don't want to say why their family got kidnapped because that bring another problem. So no one talks about it. Or you have to handle it on your own, if you know what I mean. That's all part of the trauma. That's all part of the trauma.